they become victims of human trafficking schemes. I did some teaching and training for the Veterans Administration because these individuals will work and have sex for food, shelter, and just to get by and survive. So when you think about employment activities, we tend to think about organized employment, but not those that we see who are on the streets who are looking for food. And every person who is homeless might sometimes be homeless based out of PTSD, a veteran coming back and their experiences and exposure to trauma, a person, male or female, who have been the victims of rape or who have come out and identify as another sexual orientation, who may have been thrown out of their house. We think of homeless people as being poor and not necessarily as being individuals who need to survive, because most people are only one or two paychecks away from being homeless and not necessarily helpless, but they have very few means to survive, if that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and you're right. I'm even here I live near the Duke campus, and I can tell you that if I go up to the restaurants that I was just mentioning earlier at the beginning of the show and stop by, I will probably run across at least several individuals that are fighting homelessness, or some might even be living in out in the streets, as we would say. Some living in their car, even some that are not even living in their car, because I know some that are living in in grounds and tents. Under one gentleman that was, I think he had lost his tent, was trying to get another tent, and even one of the cultural arts centers that I work at, every Sunday, well, he wasn't there this Sunday, but I did see him later, so as far as I know, he's all right and everything. But there's a gentleman that literally every Sunday is, when I come in to open up the building, he's waking up because it was a former church, so it's has that kind of church kind of environment. So and he's not the only one. I've seen others at other churches that they see that space and it's got a little bit of a covering if there's rain and everything. Not a lot of covering, but it's got a little bit of covering. So even right here in Durham, which recognizes itself as this great area that's growing, has a lot of growth, a lot of people that are moving here on a constant basis, there is also that homeless element. But coming back to human trafficking.
And you said, and I'm gonna come back to human trafficking, but let me swing back to the fact that you said Duke, and I'm gonna swing over to human trafficking. So Duke, very prominent school. I actually have my girlfriend's son attends Duke, and I have a cousin that attends Duke. I want you to think about human trafficking through the lens of vulnerability and access. So there are a number of students attending college today, as we are on this phone, who have no means of paying for school initially, staying in school currently, and trying to get through school intentionally. So they engage in activities that involve human trafficking schemes because predators are everywhere and they prey. College campuses are known to have predators who are engaged in human trafficking schemes every single day on college campuses. My son is at Howard. Children need to eat. Young people need to eat. They're not always young. We have adults that are still trying to go through school, PhDs. So when you think about human trafficking scheme, I don't want you to think about a particular type of individual because any person can be the victim of a scheme, a trafficking scheme, and vulnerable to trafficking prey, and any person can be a predator.
Yeah, no doubt about that. What do you see as some of the signs that people can have, particularly in human trafficking? What are, like, if you were at Duke and you're seeing somebody working, I mean, it's not like you're going to actually have a chance to ask them whether they're making whatever the minimum wage is. So what are, like, some signs or some attitudes or ways that you can recognize human trafficking or be alert about it in order to stop it if it's happening? And as you said, it is probably definitely happening at Duke, at North Carolina Central University, at UNC, at the various other colleges.
Yeah. So, you said you can't stop and ask somebody. One of the things, I have 4 children, and one of the things that my children have always said to me, because I travel, even when they were young, even though we were going, they said, "Mom, don't talk to strangers." And they said that, and it was a joke that we had. It's because their mom talks to everyone. So when I'm traveling, the first thing that we need to do is start actually talking to people. oftentimes, and particularly in this age of social media, we spend less time actually having conversations with people that we don't know than we do just having a simple conversation, a hello. Everywhere that I go, I actually talk to people. I look and I speak. So the one thing that we need to first do is we need to listen and we need to hear. There are two different things. We need to listen to what someone is saying, and then we actually need to hear what they actually said. And we don't tend to do that. So I speak to everyone. If you're in a hotel, every hotel that I go to, I actually talk to the staff. And I'm talking about the people that clean my room. I have a conversation with them. You said that you can't ask somebody how much do they make. Why can't you? If you're actually having a conversation and you engage with somebody, if you have a natural means of communicating with somebody, you can ask them questions without asking them questions that can cause them offense. And when you do, you can redirect and come back around. So I've literally asked people in hotels, hey, if they're not speaking the language, if they don't speak English, then I always say, hey, where are you from? Because the question is, if they don't speak the language, then how is it that they're filling out all of their paperwork? Who's helping them fill out their paperwork? We're not paying attention to things that we see. We miss stuff that we see every single day. Human trafficking is hidden in plain sight because we are ignoring things. When you see the van, is that something that makes you question? There's human trafficking that is happening in the correction systems, in jails. We know about things that we just don't say anything about. Do you see a person on a college campus that wears the same thing all of the time? They look hungry. They might look depressed. Are you asking, hey, how can I help you? Those individuals that you see on the corner often who are always there, some of them are scamming. But how do you know if you just don't ask? And we think people can't find jobs, but sometimes they are part of their job is to hustle every single day.
Yep, and that's true. I've seen some people that seem to make a decent amount of money just doing, as you said, the hustle and the panhandling thing. And we do have panhandling laws here, and sometimes they're enforced, sometimes they're not. So I do know that is true, that some people are making that their living. So you're very much right about that. And just here in Durham, I'll just give an example, and I've talked about this. Well, I don't know if we've ever talked about it on this particular show, but just here is very fascinating because I actually live in an apartment complex. The apartment complex is, I would say, probably about 75 to 80% Latin American, because that is mostly who bought this particular apartment, because these are technically the cheaper apartments. Around the corner is a African American neighborhood that is also very much lower income kind of area. It's actually, some people would consider it technically the projects. And then literally one block from the apartment complex that I live in are the high-rise apartments that are going for like anywhere from, I'll say, $1,000 to $2,000 a month. So, like I said, it's just interesting seeing that kind of dichotomy right here, and that's all within literally. If I go up to that corner gas station that I referred to earlier, where the incident happened at the beginning of the show, I literally could walk across the street and I'm right on Duke's campus.
And I have the same type of, I live in what used to be one of the roughest apartment complexes in Maryland. People say, why would you live there? And I say, why not? Why not? I work where I live. I drive up and down the highway intentionally, 14 and a half hours to Mississippi, and I can make it in 11 to 12 going to Birmingham. I am always working. But right down the street from my house, less than 5 minutes, is the MGM Grand. The individuals that do most of the cleaning, now we have a mix here in my apartment complex, but almost every person that does all of the house cleaning, as far as they come and clean our common areas every single day, they are Latin American women. I speak to them every single day. I say, hi, how are you? How are things going? I know them by name. That means I can actually talk to them. I have allowed them to come and use my bathroom in my apartment, and you can't even wear shoes in my house, so they have to take the shoes off before they come in. But it is really about the relationships that we ignore, and we cannot continue to ignore things. There are things that are happening around us, and we should ask more questions. If there is a panhandling issue and law enforcement is not doing what they should do because they are charged with the enforcement of law, then we should start asking, why not? And what is your policy? What are your policies, your practice, and what are you going to do about it? Human trafficking and the enslavement of individuals occur. It is not like, I see all of these pictures when you start talking about human trafficking when people are having conferences. And the one thing that gives me the most irritation is that we use these images of individuals with their hands bound or their mouths bound. That is not human trafficking in the 21st century. And if you think about the enslavement of individuals from the 1619 Project, where 20 enslaved individuals were brought over to this country and in Virginia, they were bound in the ships. But when you think about who worked the fields and who worked the cotton and who worked the land, they were not bound and chained in the same way. The enslavement really begins in the mind of an individual. With first, you can hold them captive with chains, but when you intentionally feed an individual that they're worthless, that they cannot go to police, that they cannot do something, it is the constant resonation of words that make a person become mute and muted and meek to their situation and circumstances, which is why we often talk about something called the trauma bond when it relates to victims who have been trafficked. And we don't talk enough about men and boys who have been the victims of human trafficking schemes, whether by sex or labor. We talk about women and girls, and those individuals are identified as victims, but we rarely speak in terms of what victims we have gender affirmation for some victims and not for others. But any person can be a victim of a human trafficking scheme, sex, labor, organ trafficking across multiple areas. There's trafficking taking place. There's a guy who writes a lot of articles about the human trafficking schemes taking place in prisons. And I teach PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. I did a lot of that because I'm the consultant for the Alabama Coalition Against Rape. About training correction officers not to ignore the victimization that they see on the inside. A woman can't get pregnant by another woman in prison, so somebody had to do something, and they can't consent when they are identified as inmates. There is no such thing as consent, but yet we don't address those issues. We make the person prove that they are the victims. So when we start talking about mass incarceration and reentry and individuals who are on probation and parole, and mind you, I'm a law enforcement instructor for the feds. Law enforcement, my entire circle consists of law enforcement. But when you are wrong, I'm going to be the first one to tell you that you're wrong. So I work from the inside out.
I know that's absolutely right, and I think we have some other callers coming in, but I definitely want to continue our conversation. But one thing I really wanted to get to you before we kind of switch the conversation a little bit, because I have some other people, including one that wrote a film about substance abuse and everything. But how did you recognize the signs that your daughter was being abused? And I understand you were abused as well. So what are some of the people's ways that we can recognize abuse? Because even when I was in a relationship that had some mental abuse, and I've talked about that on this show before, I remember my mom looking at me one time when we were going, and I was probably in my 20s or 30s, going to a store. I don't even remember what the store was. And she noticed that my head was down. And she was like, well, that girl, or that woman, I should say, must have done some really mental numbers to your head and everything. And I had to, pause there and think as an adult, I guess that person did do that at that time. And like I said, that was a relationship that was some 20 years ago. So I've definitely grown and gotten away from that. But I do remember that incident when Mom lived in Winston-Salem, and that showed me that there was some, at least mental abuse that was going on in the relationship, even if I didn't recognize it at the time. Mental or maybe even emotional abuse. But it wasn't like she was beating me down physically, but she definitely did some stuff mentally and physically. And in the hindsight, I also recognized that she had gone through some abuse, and I do know that sometimes abusers put it back on the people that they are with.
Yes. My daughter went to school. There was a program called the CAPS, the Child Assault Prevention Services Program. She went to school. It was the day after Super Bowl Sunday in 2003, January 26th to be exact. and she went. The program came to the school, and they were talking about good touch and bad touch, and she said my dad did something